Why did Jesus forgive the adulterous woman? This well-known story goes far beyond a simple act of mercy. When Jesus challenges a crowd to reflect on their own sins before condemning someone else, he reveals a powerful truth about judgment and empathy. But what was Jesus' real purpose? And what does this story teach us today about compassion and change? Let's discover together. To understand the context of this story, we need to delve into the Jewish culture of the time and the strictness of the law of Moses. In Jesus' day, the law of Moses was not just a code of conduct, it was a true moral and religious foundation that guided the lives of all Jews. The law encompassed not only the relationship between the individual and God but also the coexistence among people. Adultery, being a breach of marital vows, was seen as one of the most dishonorable acts. According to the book of Leviticus 20 verse 10, the punishment was clear: both the man and the woman caught in adultery should be stoned. This was not just a matter of punishment but of preserving the family structure and the sanctity of marriage, considered pillars of Jewish society. However, despite the law prescribing stoning for both parties, in many practical cases, the woman suffered the most from public condemnation and severe judgment. This occurred because the society was patriarchal, and women bore a greater stigma regarding purity and sexual behavior. The adulterous woman was therefore seen as a public shame, and by being exposed in this way, she lost any chance of redemption in the eyes of society. The blame was attributed almost exclusively to her, as if she were solely responsible for the transgression. Thus, in such a rigid and conservative environment, a woman accused of adultery was virtually defenseless. Behind the application of the laws, the Pharisees and other leaders also saw an opportunity to display their authority. They were the interpreters of the law of Moses, and their zeal for the law was not only spiritual but also a way to maintain their influence over the people. The rigorous application of the laws was a demonstration of power that reinforced their social position. This influence manifested, for example, in public judgments and exemplary punishments like stoning, which served to reaffirm order and respect for traditions. In many cases, the law, instead of being a path of justice and restoration, became a weapon of control. Jesus, in contrast, deeply understood this context. He knew the laws and respected tradition but did not hesitate to question how they were applied. The situation of the adulterous woman is a clear example of how laws could be used to condemn someone without considering the value of mercy or the possibility of repentance. And it is precisely at this point that the contrast arises. For Jesus, the life and dignity of a person were above immediate punishment, and he brought a new perspective that many of the leaders could not or did not want to understand. This complex web of culture, religion, and power helps us see the depth of what Jesus was about to do. He knew that by intervening in the judgment of that woman, he would be going against the expectations of many. But at the same time, he saw a chance to teach a lesson that would resonate far beyond that moment. By confronting the situation in an unexpected way, Jesus would bring a message that would forever change how forgiveness and judgment are viewed. The presence of the adulterous woman in the midst of the crowd was not the result of genuine concern for the application of the law of Moses. In fact, it was a strategy carefully orchestrated by the Pharisees and scribes, whose true objective was to compromise Jesus. They saw in the situation an opportunity to set a trap for him. Jesus was already known for his message of forgiveness, mercy, and love for one's neighbor, values that attracted many followers. But these principles contrasted with the rigor of the laws defended by the leaders. And so, placing Jesus in a situation that required a choice between compassion and adherence to the law would be, for them, a way to unmask or discredit him. This dilemma proposed by the Pharisees was subtle and complex. If Jesus said that the woman should be stoned, he would be going against everything he had taught about forgiveness and compassion. such a decision would certainly shake the confidence of many who saw in him a path of redemption and peace. On the other hand, if he absolved the woman, ignoring the law, the Pharisees would have a powerful argument against him, accusing him of disrespecting the scriptures and traditions that sustain the identity and morality of the Jewish people. Any response he gave seemed to place him in a no-win situation, where any decision could compromise his reputation and his mission. The stance of the Pharisees reveals much about their mentality. Instead of seeking justice or redemption, they were interested in using the law as a weapon of manipulation. They did not see the woman as a person but as a tool to achieve their own interests. And this shows a profound irony. The very men who should have been spiritual guides, exemplary in the application of justice, were more interested in maintaining their influence than in promoting repentance or forgiveness. By focusing on the condemnation of the woman, they forgot their own humanity, their own imperfections. This context helps us understand the depth of the challenge Jesus faced. He was not dealing merely with a moral or legal issue but with a plot where the real goal was to discredit him. By using a human life to test Jesus' faith, the Pharisees showed how far they were from the essence of compassion and mercy that the law of Moses itself sought to preserve. The law, which should have been a path to life, became in their hands a trap for death. But Jesus, with his wisdom and serenity, did not react as they expected. He did not confront them directly but chose a response that would not only preserve his mission but also offer a powerful lesson about judgment and empathy. In the silence and calm of his reaction, an approach began to emerge that would disarm everyone present. Imagine the anguish of that woman being dragged by the Pharisees into the midst of the crowd, exposed before everyone. She had been caught in adultery and was now about to face the most severe and humiliating public judgment possible. For her, there was no defense. Society saw her as someone who had broken the most sacred code and, therefore, was condemned to the scorn and extreme punishment. This woman knew that in a society where adultery was punished by death, the hope of escaping punishment was practically non-existent. This vulnerability was not only physical but also emotional and social. Being there, she was not seen as a person but as an example of sin to be punished. There was no dignity or compassion for her at that moment. What was seen was the face of error, the symbol of something that needed to be eradicated, without a chance for defense. In a society where the role of women was extremely restricted, her situation was even more serious. Her shame was total, she was helpless and without any possibility of redemption in the eyes of those who were. Beyond the shame, the fact of standing before Jesus brought a different kind of fear. For her, Jesus was known as a man of compassion and wisdom, but he also knew the law. The uncertainty about how he would react could be torturous. After all, if Jesus chose to strictly follow the law, she could have the same fate as others stoned before her. For that woman, Jesus represented a last chance for some understanding but also a risk. Amid a crowd ready to judge, she found herself without any expectation, vulnerable, and at the same time, perhaps with a silent hope that he would see something beyond her error. This brutal exposure was also a spectacle for the crowd. The spectators were not there out of compassion but to see the outcome of a public punishment. Her error was an example, and any mercy seemed to be the opposite of what that society expected. This reveals a grim aspect of human judgment, the need to see others fall to reaffirm one's own values. The woman's suffering, more than a judgment, was entertainment. Her error fed the collective desire to see justice done, even if that justice came in a cruel and merciless way. This was the situation Jesus had before him, a helpless woman, a crowd eager for condemnation, and Pharisees ready to manipulate him. In this hostile environment, Jesus' response would begin to transform the entire atmosphere of judgment into a lesson about dignity and forgiveness. Without raising his voice or accusing, he would lead each one to see more than the woman's error, and perhaps even to reflect on their own mistakes. When Jesus is pressured to respond to the clamor for justice, he does something no one expected. Instead of condemning the woman or refuting the Pharisees, he stoops down and begins to write on the ground. This seemingly simple gesture carries powerful symbolic weight. It's as if Jesus were telling the crowd that before giving any answer, a moment of silence and reflection was necessary. He pauses the judgment with an act that seems disconcerting, immediately disarming the urgency for punishment. The expectation of his response turns into suspense, and Jesus, just with this gesture, redirects the spectator's attention. The scene of Jesus writing in the sand is one of the most enigmatic and commented upon passages in the Bible. Many wonder what he wrote at that moment. Some scholars suggest that he may have listed the sins of the accusers themselves, exposing them subtly and without words. Others believe he was simply drawing to create a dramatic pause, allowing each person there to reflect on their own condition before casting the first stone. In one way or another, Jesus achieves what he wanted. The focus of judgment shifts from the woman to the condition of each person present. This moment of reflection is a lesson that transcends the context of the story. In many situations in life, before pointing fingers or rushing to judge, we forget to stop and reflect on our own condition. How often do we make decisions or express opinions amid tension, without a moment's pause? Jesus' gesture is an invitation to introspection. He reminds us that judgment without reflection can be cruel and unjust, and that silence, in many cases, can reveal deeper truths than words. For the woman, this moment was a way of restoring dignity. When Jesus diverts the crowd's eyes and begins to write, he gives her something none of the accusers had given, a moment of relief. The merciless judgment of the crowd is interrupted, and the woman is temporarily spared from the overwhelming pressure bearing down on her. Jesus seems to be saying that before any sentence, everyone needs to face their own failures and reflect on shared humanity, on the value of each individual. This act of writing in the sand is not just a response to the Pharisees but also an action that allows the crowd itself. Jesus introduces a perspective that until then seemed absent, that of empathy and self-awareness. It is at this point that the story takes an unexpected turn, where instead of condemnation, a mirror emerges for each of those present. After Jesus' gesture of writing on the ground, the crowd falls silent, awaiting what will come next. Jesus stands up and, instead of delivering a sentence, utters a phrase that would deeply resonate in the hearts of all present. "He who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone." This statement disarms any possibility of judgment because it confronts each accuser with the reality of their own faults. Suddenly, the responsibility for condemning that woman is no longer on Jesus but in the hands of each person present. It's as if Jesus were saying, before judging another's error, look at your own. This phrase carries a profound lesson because it reminds us that we are all imperfect. By saying these words, Jesus reveals that true justice is not about condemnation but about humility and understanding one's own limitations. Faced with the truth exposed by Jesus, the desire to judge transforms into a feeling of introspection. Each accuser, confronted with their own humanity, begins to drop their stones, unable to maintain the posture of an accuser. One by one, they begin to leave, from the oldest to the youngest, leaving the woman alone with Jesus. At this moment, the crowd is reminded that perfection belongs to no one, and the idea of casting the first stone becomes a symbol of arrogance that none of them can sustain. For many, this situation becomes a direct confrontation with their own conscience. It's no wonder that the older ones, perhaps having more life experience and more mistakes in their past, are the first to recognize the impossibility of judging without looking at themselves. That simple yet powerful phrase deconstructs the human desire for superiority and transforms justice into an invitation to compassion. And this call to empathy is something that applies to us today. in every interaction and judgment we make. How often are we quick to judge, point fingers, and condemn, forgetting our own faults? How often do we cast stones without remembering our imperfections? In this spirit of reflection, Jesus teaches us, in a single phrase, that justice must walk hand in hand with mercy and humility. He transforms the woman's judgment into a mirror for all who were there, and for all of us, inviting us to reflect on forgiveness. By the way, if you're enjoying this content, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. This helps the channel grow and allows more people to discover these valuable stories and reflections about the Bible and the life of Jesus. Let's dive even deeper into this story together. With the accusers leaving one by one, the atmosphere around the adulterous woman changes completely. The crowd that once seemed thirsty for justice now disperses, and what remains is an intimate and transformative moment between Jesus and the woman. He turns to her and asks, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" The question carries a tone of surprise but also of mercy. The woman, still stunned by what has just happened, replies, "No one, Lord." Then Jesus utters words that symbolize an act of grace that echoes to this day, "Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more." This moment is more than a simple pardon, it's a profound demonstration of divine mercy that offers a new chance. Jesus does not ignore the woman's sin, but instead of condemning her, he chooses the path of forgiveness and the opportunity for transformation. In a culture where wrongdoing was punished severely, this attitude is revolutionary. He is not saying that what she did is acceptable but that the error does not need to define her future. The forgiveness offered by Jesus does not eliminate the gravity of the fault but opens space for a new beginning, a chance for redemption. This act of mercy from Jesus teaches us that true forgiveness is not just an act of absolution but an invitation to a transformed life. He understands human fragility and offers an escape that the law alone could not provide. The law brought the woman to that point, but it was His grace that set her free. With this attitude, Jesus shows that for Him, the dignity and value of a person go beyond their mistakes. He is not interested only in what someone has done but in what that person can become. By forgiving the woman, He does not minimize the error but offers the possibility of renewal. For the woman, those words represent a rebirth. That moment of forgiveness is a turning point that transforms not only her life but also the way others view sin and compassion. This encounter with Jesus allows her to see beyond her error and begin to build a new story. That is the power of genuine forgiveness. It not only frees from the past but creates a bridge to the future. Jesus' mercy thus becomes a transforming force, giving the woman the opportunity to leave her error behind and follow a new path. This lesson of forgiveness challenges us to rethink our attitudes, especially when we are faced with others' failures. Do we have the same willingness to see beyond the error, to offer a second chance? Or do we cling to the idea that justice is always synonymous punishment? Jesus, with this act, invites us to look with more empathy at those who have erred and to consider the restorative power of forgiveness instead of seeking condemnation. Deep down, He reminds us that true forgiveness is that which seeks not only to absolve but to transform. As He concludes His encounter with the adulterous woman, Jesus leaves her with a powerful counsel that carries the essence of His forgiveness: "Go now and leave your life of sin." This brief but meaningful phrase is not a simple farewell. Jesus knew that complete forgiveness includes an invitation to change. He not only saves the woman from stoning but also guides her to follow a new path where error no longer needs to be a constant. He offers not only absolution but a chance for transformation, an encouragement to leave the past behind and build a new trajectory. This call to sin no more is a reminder that repentance is not limited to a feeling of guilt but must include a conscious decision to change. Jesus did not condemn her but made it clear that forgiveness also implies responsibility. The woman was not being exempted from the impact of her choices but was invited to use this new beginning to walk a different life. Jesus' stance highlights that divine grace is not a license to remain in error but an opportunity for growth and a fresh start. For the woman, these words mark the beginning of a path of self-transformation. She now had before her the chance to build a different story, free from the stigma of the error that once defined her. By saying sin no more, Jesus entrusted the woman with the responsibility for her own change, showing that, to him, she was capable of a renewed life. This call is powerful because it restores dignity and autonomy to someone who had been reduced to a mistake. Instead of simply absolving her, Jesus challenges her to become better, showing that true repentance is a continuous choice not to repeat past failures. This lesson is applicable to all who seek personal transformation. Forgiveness is just the beginning of the process. The next step is the commitment to change. We all, at some point, go through situations that invite us to leave the past behind and seek something new. But, just as Jesus advises the woman, this path requires us to turn away from previous errors and seek a life more aligned with our values. This transformation is not easy, but it is precisely this effort that defines the true depth of repentance. Jesus' message, when he says go and sin no more, reminds us that every mistake can be a starting point for a better life, as long as we are willing to take responsibility for change. It is a message of hope that shows us that no matter how much we have erred, there is the possibility of a new beginning. Jesus' forgiveness is an invitation to this journey, an encouragement for each of us to overcome failures and build a life grounded in integrity and love. The story of the adulterous woman brings a message that transcends centuries and reaches us with surprising relevance. In a society that is often quick to judge and slow to forgive, Jesus' example challenges us to rethink our attitudes toward others' failures. How many times do we condemn someone based on a single mistake, without considering the context or the possibility of change? By declaring that he who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone, Jesus teaches us that true judgment requires humility and awareness of our own imperfections. This lesson is especially relevant in the digital age, where people are constantly exposed and publicly judged for mistakes that often become viral in a matter of minutes. Social networks, for example, have become spaces where opinions and judgments are issued without any reflection. Jesus' attitude invites us to pause, to reflect before judging, remembering that behind every mistake there is a person with a story, a context, and the capacity to. He teaches us to look at others with empathy, understanding that we all have faults and that forgiveness, in many cases, is the path to true transformation. Furthermore, this story reminds us of the value of forgiveness as a healing process for both the and the forgiven. Forgiveness is liberating because it breaks the cycle of bitterness and revenge, allowing both parties to find peace. By forgiving the woman, Jesus not only frees her from condemnation but also teaches the crowd that forgiveness has the power to transform lives. Today, applying this teaching can mean offering a second chance to someone who has failed, being willing to reconcile, and recognizing that each person is more than their mistakes. Perhaps one of the most important aspects this story teaches us is about the constant possibility of starting over. For the adulterous woman, Jesus' forgiveness opened the door to a new life. Likewise, we all have the opportunity to leave the past behind and build a new story, free from previous errors. Each day, grace and forgiveness invite us to be better, to evolve. This is one of the most beautiful messages of the gospel. No matter how much we have failed, there is always a chance for redemption if we are willing to change. This story is an invitation for each of us. By applying these teachings, we can build more empathetic relationships in a less condemning society, where error is seen as an opportunity for learning and forgiveness as a path to growth. Jesus showed us that by looking beyond faults, we can help others find their best selves, and it is this transformative love that, in the end, makes the difference in every life. The story of the adulterous woman brings a series of profound teachings about judgment, forgiveness, and empathy, values that Jesus demonstrated not only with words but with transformative actions. He showed us that everyone errs and that before judging others, it is necessary to recognize our own faults. By challenging the crowd to reflect on themselves before condemning, Jesus taught that true forgiveness is not limited to absolution but also offers a new chance, a path to transformation. Applying these principles in our daily lives can be challenging but brings immeasurable rewards. Every time we choose to forgive, we free ourselves from bitterness, create space for reconciliation, and allow others to find a path to renewal. Jesus reminds us that by offering the grace of forgiveness, we are moving toward a lighter life, filled with empathy and compassion. This example is an invitation for all of us to, in some way, be agents of change and reconciliation in the world. Now that you've read this far, take a moment to reflect on how you can apply this teaching in your daily life. How about giving someone a second chance? Or perhaps looking with more empathy at others' faults? Small gestures can make all the difference. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive updates. This helps the channel grow and allows more people to learn from these teachings. Share your reflections and experiences in the comments, and together we can build a community of learning and compassion. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.